we don't have enough lawyers in this country. There are many places in this country where, especially rural areas, where you can have 10,000 people living in a two county or three county area, and you might have one lawyer there to service the entire population. And that isn't enough, because let me be the first to tell you, this might be a shock, but a lot of people need legal help for one reason or another. Either it's because of the consequences of their own conduct, or it's because of what society in general has become and what's going on with government. There's a lot of different reasons why people need us. But if you can't find us, what are you going to do?
Welcome to today's Heart of the Hustle. I am here with Nelson Locke, who is a second-time guest on Heart of the Hustle. And we were going to tell you a little bit about why he was here the first time, because we have an exciting new development to share in this episode. But first, hi, Nelson.
Hi, Sherry. How are you doing?
I'm so glad you're here.
Well, thank you.
Okay, before we get to the exciting news, I want you to give us a little bit of background on how we got here, a little bit of a recap of what we talked about in your last episode.
Certainly. And it's all good news, by the way, Sherry. It's all fantastic news, and you've had a lot to do with that, so I really appreciate that. If you remember, the last time we met, we were talking about a legal action that I had pending before the Texas Supreme Court, where I was challenging the Texas Board of Law Examiners about their refusal to admit me to Texas to practice law, despite the fact that I had 13 years of experience, a license from one of the largest states in the country, and a perfectly clean record. They were hung up, if you can say hung up. They were hung up on the concept of my education not being ABA approved, which is American Bar Association approved. That's kind of like the Chevrolet of accreditation. So everybody in the law industry looks to ABA approval. They don't really unwrap it very much. They just accept it. Okay. And what I was running into in Texas was that because Purdue Global Law School, which is where I graduated in 2011, it was not accredited by the American Bar Association, Texas was just slamming the door in my face over and over and over again. And that went on for over 3 years. So finally, I'd had enough. And I filed a petition for administrative review with the Texas Supreme Court. And in the alternative, I suggested that the Texas Supreme Court could simply issue a writ of mandamus ordering the Texas Board of Law Examiners to admit me. Well, the Supreme Court part of this took approximately a year for me to complete. But the result that I got back in June, which is what we talked about, was that the Supreme Court agreed completely with my position about my qualifications, about the quality of my education, and about the quality of my prior law practice. And they ordered the Texas Board of Law Examiners to reopen my application and admit me as quickly as they possibly could. So as you remember, I was admitted. And for some of you who are not familiar maybe with the way this case has gone over the most recent months, you can go to our website at locklaw.us, which is LOCKELAW.us, and you'll find a section in there about Texas bar admission, and there's a copy of a podcast interview I did with you, Sherry, that I think would really explain the circumstances.
What was the issue with the ABA? Why did they not, for lack of a better word, like the degree that you had from Purdue?
Many states in the United States have grabbed a hold of the ABA as the be-all, end-all in the approval process for law schools. And they do that because the ABA has a history, number one, and number two, the ABA has established certain criteria for professional conduct, and the ABA offers continuing education products for attorneys to help them get better as they practice. And so most states have sort of like thrown in the towel, I guess I would say, as far as actually taking an active role in making decisions about which law schools should be admitted or not. Most states just simply say, let's go with the ABA and we'll let them worry about it. I'm paraphrasing, but that's exactly what's going on.
And why did the ABA not approve Purdue Law School in particular?
Well, it's not that the ABA didn't approve Purdue Global Law School. It's that the ABA was more hung up on the idea that if I didn't sit in a classroom with a professor within 50 feet of me, I couldn't possibly learn the law. And what that is that's absolutely contemptuous to a current delivery system that's used in education and in higher education and professional degrees. I think probably certainly in the U.S., but maybe in the world.
Because Purdue Global Law School is all online.
Yes.
And it's one of the first.
Yes. Well, Purdue Global, the online school that I attended, was formerly known as Concord and was acquired by Purdue Global. And it was acquired because Concord was the pioneer, the first online law school ever. It was established, I believe it was in 1995, and I enrolled in 2005. I was one of kind of the early pioneer group of people. But that school was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. And I got to tell you something. When I say it's phenomenal, words are cheap, but let me give you some numbers. The last 5 years, Purdue Global's bar admission rate, listen up, people, has been 76%.
Which is unheard of.
It's higher than the ABA's average. So the ABA requires you to spend $200,000 to go to law school, requires you to take all that time and go sit in a classroom, and requires you to have within touching distance of professor's concept, all of which is very contemptuous of the idea of distance or online learning, and they can't beat our grades. So we're learning better and probably, I don't think faster, because, for example, a typical law school education is a 3-year education. I actually was in law school for 4 years part-time. They required me to take more credit hours than what a typical ABA school would have required. I took every single course that anybody in an ABA school took. Yet states like Texas would say, well, you never set foot in a classroom, so consequently you really probably don't know what you're doing, so we're not going to approve your school and we won't let you in.
Which is crazy after COVID, right? Where everyone went to school online.
Yes, it's insane. It's insane. Plus, there are thousands of graduates from schools like Purdue Global that are out there practicing and are practicing ethically and effectively. And I mean, that's an important point. You know, we don't have enough lawyers in this country. There are many places in this country where, especially rural areas, where you can have 10,000 people living in a 2-county or 3-county area, and you might have one lawyer there to service the entire population. And that isn't enough, because let me be the first to tell you, this might be a shock, but a lot of people need legal help for one reason or another. Either it's because of the consequences of their own conduct, or it's because of what society in general has become and what's going on with government. There's a lot of different reasons why people need us. But if you can't find us, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Even small business owners. You and I were talking earlier this week about, I'm trying to trademark something, and who do I talk to, right?
Right.
You need to have an attorney for that, right? To create an LLC, all the things that, even if it's not conduct related, right? That's just course of life,
Housekeeping.
Right? Housekeeping, for sure.
Yeah, I recently had a not-for-profit come to me, and they said, would you please help us with formation? We want to get started, and we want to do this right because we want to be a 501c3. And for example, it was here in the state of Texas. So listen, I just said in the state of Texas. So this might have been the first actual Texas state client I ever undertook, but it was a not-for-profit. And within a matter of 4 weeks, I had accomplished the formation of the corporation through the state of Texas's websites. I had created the bylaws and the other corporate governance documents that were required. I had applied for and received the employee identification number from the IRS. I filled out the 501c3 application that's required for tax-exempt status. And I'd received verification back from the state of Texas and from the federal government that I did everything correct and the organization was established and valid. And you know what? I don't know that they would have known where to go if they didn't know me. So there you go.
Yeah.
That's an example.
And you were only able to do that because you were admitted finally into the Texas bar. You know, you have your bar card. I was there with you when you were sworn in, which was an amazing day. You can find that video on both of our sites. So now what? That was Chapter 1 of the story. We are now at Chapter 2. Tell us what's happened.
That's a really good way to put it, because really what happened here was I had developed with my legal team a 2-prong if you want to call it combat tactics, that's really what I call it, because after 2 years of absolute door slamming, I was into combat tactics with the Texas Board of Law Examiners. That's what it took. I had to fight to get that bar card. So what I did was I broke it, I bifurcated it into 2 sections. The first chapter was get me in the bar, okay? The second chapter was get everybody else in the bar.
Yeah.
Have everybody else that was just like me. If me, why not them? And that's absolutely valid. So in our complaint and in our petition for administrative review and in all the legal pleadings that we had filed, I made it pretty clear that a state-accredited online law school was at least the equivalent of any ABA school, and in many cases better, such as Purdue Global Law School, which is the gold standard. I've been calling it that for years, and I mean it, and it is. And, that was kind of demonstrated when you met Dean Pritikin, who actually flew from California to Texas to be there when I was sworn in by Judge John Roach in Collin County. So the reality is, who does that? I don't know one lawyer who was ever sworn into the bar by, first of all, a Marine Corps former JAG who was a captain in the Marine Corps and is now a county judge, but also the deans don't show up. The ABA school deans, they're too busy. Okay? Well, I shouldn't sound like I have bias against ABA. I suppose I do, if I'm going to be completely honest, because I chose to learn a different way, and I got beat to death for it. But ultimately, we came out on top. So anyway, the first part was get me in. The second part is get everybody else in. Well, here's what we're talking about today. The last podcast, we talked about how unbelievably hard we fought that battle and that we had won and that I was admitted. Now we can talk about the rest of you, and I think this is important. The Texas Supreme Court issued a ruling last Friday afternoon at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Right on time, too. They were unbelievable. And what they basically said is, well, we've wrapped up our review of all these other considerations we had about whether online would be good and whether non-ABA should be admitted, how this affects portability and how this affects, the credibility of a license from one state to another. And we've kind of made the following decisions. And I'm going to read you something, because this is the news that I think everybody should pay attention to. The court said in docket number 25-9070 that they were preliminarily approving amendments to Rule 1 of the rules governing admission to the Bar of Texas. Well, that's the big one, and that's the one that talks about the American Bar Association. And what they said here is that on April 4th, 2025, they had asked the public to make comments, and they made a statement here that they had reviewed many very helpful comments. But then they go on to say the court is of the tentative opinion that the ABA should no longer have the final say on whether a law school's graduates are eligible to sit for the Texas bar and become licensed to practice law in Texas. That was what I was fighting for. I'm so happy to see that. There are thousands of you out there that are graduates of online law schools that had no path to licensure. And now at least you've got a fair shot at it. And I think that's a very important thing. Then the Supreme Court went on to say that they were going to issue an order finalizing the amendments after the close of the comment period, which is going to close on December 1st of this year. Now, that's amazing, Sherry, because they're acting quickly. It might have taken me a year and a half to get through the process, but once they finally absorbed everything, read our pleadings, and understood what the issue was, they're moving like a freight train. And hey, listen, if there's any Supreme Court people watching, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Because there's really
deal.
no reason for them to go this quickly, right? That's a signal that they clearly believe that this rule change needs to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And let me give you a little factoid of why what you just said is so true. When the comments came in during the comment period about whether or not the state of Texas should reduce its dependence upon the ABA, there were about 11 or 12 really good packets of information submitted by ABA-approved law schools. Well, wouldn't you know that 10 of the 11, I think it was, all argued that we just couldn't function without the ABA, and that to remove the ABA would be a bad thing, and that, oh my God, It's going to be difficult on Texas consumers, and how will we ever control anything if we don't have the ABA? 10 of the 11 said that. Now, one dean of a very large Texas school, I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but it might involve hook 'em horns. I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is he said, hey, wait a minute. This might be a good idea. Okay? And he wrote a very nice white paper on why he believed that having this kind of an open mind and relooking at this and rethinking this could be in step with the way the business is today. Now, also, and I'm very proud of this, Dean Pritikin wrote a massive paper where he laid out all the facts, not the feelings, but the facts about how non-ABA students are performing around the country that graduated from Purdue Global Law School. And the facts were stunning. Anyway, when I see that the Supreme Court says, including review of the many helpful comments received, I know they dug into it. And you said, did they finally figure it out? I believe that they became aware of a lot of things they weren't aware of.
Yeah.
Not the least of which is how fine an online education actually can be. So I think that's great. But I want to tell you, in this docket 259070, when you go into it and you look at the language, it's very simple. They've been very simple in their instructions to the TBLE. They've said basically rewrite the rules, talk about portability, make sure that a Texas law school degree can go to other states. And you notice it doesn't say a Texas ABA law school degree going into other states. It says a Texas law school going into other states. And then it says, and to preserve the portability of out-of-state law school degrees into Texas. Well, that would be a classic example of Purdue Global. Mm-hmm. And there are hundreds of other schools around the country that could be affected by this. Then the Supreme Court, in addition to some other things, addressed a comment that was specific to my argument. And that was about, what about a school that's not ABA accredited when somebody graduates, okay? Texas told me that because my school wasn't state accredited until 2020 and I had graduated in 2011, that it didn't matter that it was a good school now because it probably wasn't a good school then. That was the thought process. Well, Dean Pritikin responded by simply pointing out that the program in 2011 that I completed from 2005 to 2010 was essentially the same program they have today, that it had always been a good program and it had always produced qualified attorneys. So, I think the Supreme Court paid attention to that too. And although they go at this from a slightly different angle, it's for the same rationale. They say that they want to make sure that the new rules do not consider the fact that a law school that loses ABA accreditation is sufficient grounds for removal of that school from the Texas list of approved schools. So in other words, if they were once approved and then they become not approved, and all these people that graduated when it was approved, would they be affected if they applied? Well, now they wouldn't be affected. They would get credit for that. And I think that's kind of the flip side of what my argument was. So I was happy to see that. It goes through another criteria here, too, where it talks about, in consultation with the Texas Board of Law Examiners, that the Supreme Court intends to develop a deliberative approach to requests from law schools not currently accredited by the ABA that wish to be added to the Texas list. That's a funny comment because I love that because that affects Purdue Global. But I want to tell you something. In the law, we're told don't sign false certifications, tell the truth, never lie, right? Do you know that when I was filling out my paperwork to actually get my bar card, one of the questions I had to answer was, what law school did I attend? And it wouldn't let me put Purdue Global in there. It wanted me to select other and correspondence, which was a flat-out misrepresentation. Isn't that amazing? So I went back to the Texas Board of Law Examiners and I said, I'm not going to do that. You're going to add Purdue Global Law School to your list of law schools so that I can select it from the drop-down list and tell the public the truth about where I went to school.
Yeah.
And you know what? They did it within a day, because I think they were probably a little tired of me, but that's okay. Anyway.
And they knew it was right.
Every single argument we've been making has been right because they're all fundamentally grounded in common sense and fairness. And that's what this whole thing is about. This docket, well, anyway, so I'm in, And now you all have got a shot. And I think by January, by probably the first week of January, we're going to have another response on this, and we'll find out. Now, the Supreme Court did say that they were of the tentative opinion that the ABA should no longer have the final say. I don't know. Could that change? I suppose anything is possible. But Sherry, these 9 judges, it's not their first rodeo. They didn't write this without having a pretty good idea of where they were headed.
Right.
So I think many of you should feel optimistic, as do I, that Texas is finally going to open this field up to qualified graduates from non-ABA schools, and that some of these barriers are going to be gone. What do you think of that?
All from your work.
Well, I wouldn't say all, but I would say we certainly had a lot to do with it. And, well, let me tell you, I say this with a little bit of humor, but good Lord, I hope I draft all the rest of my pleadings as well as this one came out. Because it's a complicated business. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I'm in the process now of putting together an application for the state of Florida. And Florida, for those of you who might be in Florida watching this, Florida has a prohibition against non-ABA. But Florida also has a waiver rule that was different from Texas. Florida will allow you to try to waive in if you went to a non-ABA school after you have at least 5 years of practice and you can prove that you know what you're doing, which means you have to provide pleadings and you have to provide expert reports and all those kinds of things. So I'm going to do all of that, but I believe Florida has announced that they're going to also issue an opinion on this requirement that all schools be ABA required, and they're going to try to do that by, I think it's the end of October. So I'm watching for it, and you and I may do another podcast and talk about that once that comes out, because Florida, there are some big states in the country that a lot of us really want to practice in. New York is one of them, California, Florida, Texas, the big states. I don't want to say that the small states aren't meaningful. They're meaningful. But the big states, if you have a business like what I have, which does primarily mortgage compliance work, there are so many mortgage lenders, both nationally and locally headquartered in states like California, Florida, and Texas. Yeah. So I'm trying to cover that trifecta with proper bar licenses, so I no longer have to say to my clients, well, that's a state matter. Why don't you go try to find somebody you don't know and trust them? Because, if they've been my client, they trust me.
Yeah.
So why can't I be the full-service lawyer? And that's what I'm trying to be. So.
And do you believe that Florida is making these changes or considering it because of what's happening in Texas?
I think
the timing seems...
Well, it's very interesting that you should ask that, because originally they were going to issue their opinion Tuesday of this week, which would be September, I think it was 28th or 20, something like that. And when the Texas response came out on Friday, on Monday, Florida postponed for 30 days. So now what does that mean? I don't know. Maybe Florida was about to issue an opinion that they really loved the ABA and they couldn't function without it. Mm-hmm. And now maybe they have to rethink it. There are 6 or 8 states now where this ABA thing isn't an issue. It's the trend. The train has left the station. And I think perhaps Florida will notice that and understand that they can take the ABA-only position, but they'll be in a minority soon instead of a majority.
Has the ABA made any comment about this, or have they said anything?
Well, you ask the greatest questions. You ask the greatest questions. I love that. No, the ABA hasn't said anything other than a few public announcements about how important they are. Okay, which is fine. That's fine. They're entitled to that. I think I'm pretty important too.
I enjoy making public announcements about how important I am. I'm very important.
There you go. So I think they've made some of those kinds of announcements. So like, oh no, if you don't use us, you're going to have attorneys that'll be off. They'll be running wild. They'll be running amok. Well, the reality of it is no, we won't be. But here's what I've had. I've had lawyers in the state of Texas, for example, that have talked to me, that have said, well, I'm really glad you got in, but we need the ABA. And then when I say, why? They go, we just need them. And I say, but what Why do you need them? Doesn't your school have a code of ethics? Isn't your Supreme Court capable of doing the same thing the ABA does? My God, it's the Supreme Court. Oh, by the way, that was one of the Texas Board of Law Examiners' argument, and this probably will carry over to other states. The TBLE maintained, I read it again this morning, interesting enough, they maintained that they didn't have to answer to anybody. And I think that my case made that crystal clear, that they have a boss. And it's the Texas Supreme Court who is now acting affirmatively to get this problem taken care of.
So what is the role of the ABA? Is it just to accredit these schools? I mean, do they do other things? Is it more of a professional organization?
It is a professional organization. They created and have kept contemporary a code of conduct, which is an excellent code of conduct, and it's used as the model by many states. Okay, that's good. They do continuing education. They do a lot of pro bono work. They're a good organization. Don't get me wrong. The ABA is a good organization. But because of the ABA, everything I learned was deemed inadequate, and I was deprived of what I think is my right to pursue the career that I wanted to pursue in the state of Texas. Now, this whole matter has been resolved by the Supreme Court of Texas. Now we'll take a look and see what Florida does, and then I'm going to look at a few other states, because I have gotten response from law students who have just graduated in other states that don't know what to do because their Purdue Global degree is in that gray area right now. You know, it used to be very black and white. Okay, there was a red line stop, but now it's much more gray, and I think that our efforts have been extremely persuasive.
I was with you at a Purdue Global Law School kind of alumni group on this weekend.
Yes.
And there was someone there who was a recent graduate
Yes.
or about to graduate. And she was just thrilled about this because she was like, well, I thought I was only going to be able to take, the California bar, or, that is one of the only states that would recognize.
North Carolina, but I live in Texas. What am I going to do?
And she's like, I can actually work in the state that I live in. She happens to live here in Texas. And she was like, this opens up a whole new career and so all these different options for me that I didn't have before.
That particular student was thinking about moving to Connecticut. Texas was going to lose that person to the state of Connecticut because Connecticut had an open mind and had already addressed this issue. Okay? And now, well, I think we could say that she was somewhat speechless.
She was so excited and honored and almost flabbergasted because it had just come out that she could finally. She's like, these are all the things that I've wanted to do. She was talking about one particular area of law that she always wanted to do, but she didn't think that she could here in her home state.
Right.
And that now she was going to be able to have the career that she always wanted. And I just thought that was really special.
I'm hoping that when these comments come out, the Supreme Court has requested it once again that they be in by December 1st and that then the Supreme Court's going to rule on them by January 1st, I believe it is. I'm hoping that when those comments come out, one of the things we're going to see is, hey, look, people, if my state of Texas, which I love, is going to pick up this baton and give you this opportunity, move here. There's a lot of room for good lawyers, and especially lawyers like those of us that graduated from Purdue. So hear me out. Think about it. This is a great place to live.
Yeah. So what's next?
Well, I'm going to wait for this decision, and I'm going to continue to wade through the 100,000-pound box of paper that I have to put together for Florida, with exemplars of my work product and so on and so forth. And I'm putting that list together of what I'm going to provide to them so they can decide whether or not they think I'm qualified or not. But I don't think they're going to have a problem with that. I personally believe that they're going to approve my application for admission to the bar, but I think they're going to require me to take a bar exam. Now, I thought about that, and I think this message I'm really giving to everybody who's watching this. I want everybody out there to remember that those of us that passed a California bar exam, listen, I had a little bit of an accommodation for a back injury, but I was tested for 6 solid days to pass that bar exam. I flew to California and was in that classroom with a proctor for 6 days. The point I'm trying to make is, I'm not so afraid of having to take bar exams. It's more about the time that it takes. But you know what? If you're thinking about this, I want you to be open-minded about that, because if we can get the schools approved to the point where the ABA thing is no longer a block to admission, and all you have to do is take a bar, every single one of you, especially you Purdue grads and Purdue students, you're all going to have the tools you need to pass a bar in any state in this country. Because if you can pass California, you can pass anything. Just remember that, okay?
And then what's next for you after Florida? How is this going to change the way that you run your business, run your firm, run your practice?
What it's going to be able to do is, I have a lot of clients, mortgage company clients out in California. I have a fair number in Texas, but not too many because I was never able to provide state services. That's changing. The clients are coming online. But in Florida, even without a bar license in Florida, I have hundreds of mortgage company clients. And I have those because I am the past president of the largest mortgage broker association in the United States. And we had 4,300 members during my service as president and on that executive committee. And those people remember me. So they come to me when they need compliance work. But when they get into trouble, and we all do, we get into trouble. And that's not necessarily because we're bad people. Regulations are complicated. They're very complex. That's why we need lawyers who understand the industries.
And it's why you went to law school, right? Because you were working in the mortgage industry and you were like, I had to be a lawyer to understand this stuff.
It was happening to me, and I didn't like it. It was happening to me. I actually had a regulator. We talked about that story. HUD at one point was chasing me over some phantom issue, and I didn't know how to get rid of them. And I said, I'm going to law school. I'm not letting this happen ever, ever, ever again. And so consequently, I did. Well, presently, what I have to do with people in Florida, I've got all these clients, hundreds and hundreds of mortgage loan originators and small mortgage broker companies. I have to send them to somebody else that they don't know. And usually the person I send them to ends up being somebody who also doesn't understand anything about the mortgage industry. So the lawyers make mistakes in the defense of the broker. And I mean, they miss big, important points that might be justifications for the conduct that's being challenged by a regulator. So what I'm going to do in Florida is I'm going to open up my practice to the state matters as well as the federal matters, and all of my clients can go home and sleep at night, because when I'm fighting for them, they're going to win. That's how I look at it.
So please come back and keep us posted.
Oh, we will. I'm going to guess you and I are going to be talking right after the first of the year, and we'll have some more news to discuss. In the meantime, if anybody would like some help with any of these state bar issues, no matter what state bar it is, go NL at Locke.Law, LOCKELAW.US. Email's probably best, so Locke.Law.us, NL at Locke.Law.us. I'll get right back to you, and I'd love to have you as a client.
Great. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Sherry.